Imagine living the greatest miracle in human history, only to realize the real work was just starting. Most people know the dark details of the crucifixion, and most know the glorious morning of the empty tomb. But what about the silence that followed? What would you do if you had exactly 40 days to prepare a terrified, broken group of people to change the world forever? These 40 days before the beginning of the global church are often skipped over, treated as a mere intermission between two massive historical events. But they were not. This period was the most careful, surgical work of Jesus' entire public life. He didn't ascend to heaven on Sunday morning. He stayed behind in the shadows, in the quiet, solitary moments, to heal traumas, clear intense doubts, and restore people who were fundamentally shattered. This was a different kind of wilderness experience for him. The disciples were locked away in absolute fear behind closed doors. The religious leaders who had orchestrated the brutal crucifixion were still firmly in power, and heavily armed Roman soldiers still patrolled the dusty streets of Jerusalem. To be identified as a follower of the crucified Galilean was seen as an immediate death sentence. In the midst of this heavy, suffocating fear, Jesus began his final, intimate mission. He stepped into their locked rooms and completely shattered their isolation. He didn't come with roaring thunder or ground-shaking earthquakes, but with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who had conquered the grave. The profound trials he faced now were not his own physical hunger in a desert, but the spiritual starvation and deep psychological brokenness of his closest friends. Every single day of those 40 days was a deliberate, calculated step to replace their paralyzing terror with unshakable spiritual authority, ensuring that the movement would survive and ultimately thrive. Imagine the overwhelming weight of proving the impossible to men who had lost all hope. The very first trial Jesus faced in these 40 days was overcoming the deep-seated, painful skepticism of his own followers. He had to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that his resurrection was real, not a collective hallucination or a desperate spiritual vision born of grief. He showed them his scarred hands. He revealed the side where the Roman spear had violently entered, and he explicitly invited them to touch the physical reality of his wounds. To definitively shatter their disbelief, he asked for food and ate roasted fish right in front of the entire group. As the ancient world well knew, a purely spiritual entity does not consume roasted fish. Jesus made absolutely sure that no one could rationally dismiss what they were witnessing. But the psychological trials continued out on the dusty roads. Consider the story of the two disciples walking on the road to Emmaus, carrying a heavy burden of grief that made their legs heavy. They were retreating from the city, their hopes entirely crushed, discussing the terrifying reports of an empty tomb with utter confusion. Jesus approached them in solitary anonymity, walking alongside them as a simple stranger. He didn't reveal his true identity immediately. Instead, he patiently listened to their despair, and then, slowly, he opened the ancient scriptures, connecting the complex dots of everything written about the Messiah. It was a masterful, intimate theological lesson delivered on a quiet road. Only when he finally sat with them, took the bread, blessed it, and broke it, were their blind eyes finally opened. And in that precise moment of miraculous recognition, he completely vanished from their sight. They were left alone with burning hearts, rushing back to Jerusalem in the dark to share the impossible truth. Imagine the divine patience required to wait quietly for a single doubting heart to find its faith. Among the core group of disciples, Thomas was conspicuously absent during the first extraordinary encounter, and his reaction to the news was a firm, rational, and unyielding refusal. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." It was a remarkably clear condition, a bold line drawn directly in the sand of his own deep skepticism. And what did the resurrected king do? He simply waited. He waited 8 full days, just to have a singular, isolated moment with this one stubborn, doubting disciple. When Jesus finally appeared again in that locked room, he didn't offer a harsh reprimand or a lecture on faith. He offered a deeply personal invitation. He looked directly into Thomas's eyes and told him to reach out and touch the physical scars. Jesus absolutely refused to waste a single day of those 40 days, determined not to leave even one of his own men behind in the dark shadows of uncertainty. Thomas's response shifted instantly from radical skepticism to the most complete and profound confession recorded in the biblical texts. "My Lord and my God." This quiet, solitary victory over profound human doubt is one of the most powerful backstage moments of history. Jesus was systematically healing their fractured minds, directly addressing the massive trauma of the crucifixion that had completely destroyed their worldview. He gently opened their understanding, showing them exactly how the Passover lamb, the suffering servant of Isaiah, and the entire complex sacrificial system pointed directly to his ultimate sacrifice. When they finally grasped that the cross was not a tragic Roman accident, but the breathtaking climax of centuries of ancient prophecy, their entire perspective changed forever. Imagine the raw, emotional challenge of intimately restoring a close friend who had completely and publicly betrayed you. After the initial shock of the resurrection, some of the disciples, including the impulsive Peter, retreated back to the familiar shores of Galilee, returning to their old lives and their heavy fishing nets. They fished all through the dark night in the biting cold and caught absolutely nothing. At the break of dawn, a solitary figure stood quietly on the shoreline. It was Jesus, waiting patiently for them by a warm charcoal fire, having already prepared a simple breakfast of fresh bread and fish. The sovereign King of the universe, 40 days into his resurrected glory, had woken up early to cook breakfast for tired, discouraged fishermen, proving that his victory over death had not diminished his profound, human care for those he loved. After they ate in silence, Jesus took Peter for a private walk down the beach. This was arguably the most delicate emotional trial of the entire 40 days. Peter was still carrying the crushing, unbearable weight of having denied Jesus 3 separate times on the horrific night of the arrest, swearing with loud curses around a similar charcoal fire in the high priest's courtyard. Jesus stopped and asked him a simple, piercing question. "Peter, do you love me?" He asked it not just once, but exactly 3 times. Peter was deeply grieved by the repetition, entirely missing the divine surgery that was taking place. Jesus wasn't cruelly rubbing his past failure in his face. He was meticulously erasing each of the 3 bitter denials with a beautiful reaffirmation of love and a brand new commission to lead. Beside another charcoal fire, using the exact same element and the exact same number, Jesus healed the deepest wound in Peter's shattered soul. Without this solitary, perfectly designed restorative walk, Peter might have been lost forever. Imagine the bittersweet moment of final departure, knowing with absolute certainty that the foundation of the future was finally secure. Jesus did not rush his exit from this world. He purposefully used every single one of those 40 days to ensure that his transformative message was firmly planted deep within the hearts of his followers. He met them in locked, fearful rooms, on dusty, desolate roads, and by quiet, foggy lake shores. He proved, time and time again, that the immense love that drove him to the agony of the cross was the kind of love that simply does not know the grammar of abandonment. The trials he faced during this critical period were the complex trials of human frailty, overcoming the paralyzing terror, the stubborn doubt, and the devastating, toxic shame of the ordinary men and women who would soon carry his monumental name to the absolute ends of the earth. When he finally ascended into the clouds from the Mount of Olives, he rose with the profound peace of knowing that he had done absolutely everything that needed to be done. The fragile disciples, who had once fled in absolute terror into the dark night of his arrest, were now entirely transformed, ready to face severe Roman persecution and violent death with an unwavering, joyful conviction. This beautiful period before the beginning of the global church reminds us that God's deepest and most permanent work often happens in the quiet, unseen, solitary intervals of our chaotic lives. If this immersive journey through the historical backstage of these amazing 40 days has deeply moved you, or if you are currently facing a quiet, difficult season of preparation yourself, please comment down below. Which of these solitary encounters with the resurrected Jesus speaks most deeply to your own personal struggles? Share your honest thoughts, leave any questions you might have, and make absolutely sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next deep dive. Imagine the crushing weight of trying to convince broken men that the impossible had just become reality. The second great trial Jesus faced during these 40 days was not a spiritual battle in a desert, but the psychological fortress of his own disciples' grief. Jerusalem was a powder keg. Outside, beyond the heavy wooden doors of the upper room, Roman soldiers marched with iron-studded sandals, their armor clanking in the narrow, dusty streets. The Sanhedrin, the same men who had orchestrated his brutal execution, were actively hunting his followers, spreading rumors of a stolen corpse. The air inside the room was thick, heavy with the smell of stale bread, unwashed bodies, and the suffocating stench of pure terror. The disciples were paralyzed. When Jesus suddenly stood in their midst, he did not ignore the human trauma. He walked directly into the heart of it. He knew that abstract theological concepts could never heal a traumatized mind. "Look at my hands and my feet," he commanded, his voice carrying the serene authority of a universe at peace. He invited them to touch the physical reality of his execution. This was not a ghostly apparition or a collective hallucination born of deep mourning. He asked for a piece of broiled fish, taking it and eating it right before their wide, incredulous eyes. In the ancient world, as the historian Flavius Josephus well understood, physical proof was the only currency that mattered against the terrifying finality of a Roman crucifixion. Jesus was performing divine surgery on their shattered worldviews. He spent these days meticulously deconstructing their profound disillusionment. They expected a conquering warrior king to overthrow Caesar. Instead, they received a suffering servant who conquered the grave. He walked the dusty road to Emmaus with 2 heartbroken followers, hiding his identity just long enough to let them pour out their rawest doubts. He listened to their deep disappointment before systematically opening the ancient scriptures, proving that the cross was not a tragic accident, but the masterful climax of a centuries-old prophecy. His silence was not absence. It was the ultimate and patient preparation. Imagine the divine patience required to wait in absolute silence for a single skeptical heart to find its faith. Among the core group of disciples, Thomas was conspicuously absent during that first extraordinary encounter in the upper room. His reaction to the sweeping news from the others was a firm, coldly rational, and unwavering refusal. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." It was an incredibly clear condition, a bold line drawn directly in the sand of his own deep skepticism and paralyzing grief. And what did the risen king do? He simply waited. He waited 8 long days just to have a singular, isolated moment with this one stubborn, broken disciple. When Jesus finally appeared again in that same locked room, where the air still hung heavy with the fear of Roman patrols outside, he did not offer a harsh rebuke or a complex theological sermon on faith. Instead, he offered a deeply personal invitation. He looked directly into Thomas's weary eyes and told him to reach out and touch the physical scars. Jesus absolutely refused to waste a single day of those 40 crucial days, determined not to leave even one of his men behind in the dark shadows of uncertainty and depression. Thomas's response shifted instantly from radical skepticism to the most complete and profound confession recorded in the biblical texts. "My Lord and my God." This silent, solitary victory over deep human doubt is one of the most powerful behind-the-scenes moments in all of history. Jesus was systematically healing the fractured minds of his friends, directly addressing the massive trauma of the crucifixion that had pulled the rug out from under them. He did not demand a blind, unquestioning faith. He provided tangible evidence, teaching in practice that true leadership and divine love do not crush doubt with force. They sit beside us in our worst locked rooms and offer their own wounds as undeniable proof that the end has not yet come. Imagine the heavy, suffocating weight of total failure. What happens when the person you betrayed is standing right in front of you? For Peter, the fourth great trial of these 40 days was not about theological understanding. It was about the crushing reality of personal shame. The disciples had retreated to the familiar shores of the Sea of Galilee. They had gone back to their old lives, casting heavy, wet nets into the dark, freezing water. They worked through the bitter cold of the night and caught absolutely nothing. Their physical exhaustion mirrored their deep, unresolved spiritual emptiness. Then the dawn broke. The morning mist rolled across the calm water. A solitary figure stood quietly on the shoreline. It was Jesus. He did not come with a legion of angels or a thunderous rebuke for their lack of faith. He came with the smell of smoke. He had built a warm charcoal fire and was roasting fresh fish and bread. The resurrected King of the universe, holding all authority in heaven and on earth, was cooking a simple breakfast for his tired, failing friends. This is where ancient history crashes violently into our modern daily lives. Jesus did not wait for Peter to clean himself up. He met him in the messy, frustrating reality of his everyday work. After they ate in silence, Jesus took Peter for a private walk down the sandy beach. He asked a piercing question. "Peter, do you love me?" He asked it exactly 3 times. The smell of that charcoal fire on the beach was the same as the fire in the courtyard where Peter had cursed and denied him 3 times. Jesus was not rubbing salt in the wound. He was performing divine, emotional surgery. He was meticulously erasing every single denial with a beautiful, specific restoration. In our daily routines, we often carry the heavy baggage of our own betrayals, our secret failures, and our loudest mistakes. We expect divine punishment. Instead, the resurrected Christ prepares a fire, invites us to eat, and gently heals the deepest wounds of our shame. Imagine the silence, thick and charged with purpose, atop the Mount of Olives. The wind blew softly over the Judean dust as the morning mist began to dissipate. The 5th and final trial was not faced by Jesus, but left as an eternal legacy for those who remained behind. After 40 days of surgical, intimate, and invisible work, the moment of final departure had finally arrived. But this time, there were no locked doors in stifling rooms. There were no looks of terror, nor the smell of cold sweat from those fleeing imminent death. The same men and women who had cowered in the shadows of Jerusalem were now standing in the open air, under the relentless sun, looking toward the heavens with absolutely unshakable conviction, and ready to face the world. Jesus did not rush his exit from human history. He did not ascend immediately after leaving the empty tomb. He used every one of those silent hours, every meal shared on the freezing shores of Galilee, and every anonymous walk along dirt roads to ensure his message would survive the most brutal and deadly empire of the ancient world. He took Peter's shame and transformed it into fierce leadership. He took Thomas's cold skepticism and forged the unbreakable foundation of faith. He took minds shattered by the trauma of the crucifixion and built a force capable of carrying divine light to the darkest corners of the earth. The great miracle of these 40 days was not just that he was alive, but that he had brought them back to life. These days remind us of a profound truth. The most permanent work of the divine does not happen on lit stages, but in the silent and deserted seasons of our own lives. When adversity knocks at the door, that is when the true preparation begins. Which of these solitary encounters resonated most with your own struggles? Leave your comment below, share your questions about this fascinating historical period, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dives into history.